Good morning. While you're making your way to your seat for the start of our 9 a.m. plenary with Father Mark, I've got a few announcements to share. If you are attending Tim Reske's workshop this afternoon at 2:45, it has moved down the hall to Suite 200 here on this level of the Hari Union. Just head that way. And yes. Excuse me, Pete did. Thank you. See, this is why you have to have people in your corner, because they gotta fix you. Peter Reske, thank you. This afternoon, 2:45, Suite 200. Also, as you, this is our last day together. It's been so good to be together. As you make your way out of this year's meeting of the Institute of Liturgical Studies, if you happen to do that from this building, there will be a box for you to recycle your name tag on the way out. That same box will be present at the Sending Eucharist, as well as the banquet tonight. So if you want to keep it as a souvenir and sell it on eBay later, knock yourself out. If you're a seminary student or a seminary faculty member and you're going to be eating lunch in Founders, I would love to have you at a table with me to hear more about how the Institute might be of service to seminarians and seminary curricula. Also, we got a sort of a more relaxed afternoon, which is lovely, and it's raining, just so you know you're in Northwest Indiana. But I'd encourage you either at 1:30 to attend the rehearsal for the festival choir with Sally, or join me and Amanda Iglesias over at the Brower Museum for her gallery talk on the architecture of prayer. It's a lovely, lovely show. And that's it. So we'll hang out for 15 minutes while folks join us, and then we'll get started.
It's the people around you. Good morning. My name is Anne-Marie Hartner-Cook, and I am privileged to serve on the Advisory Council for the Institute. To be a Christian is to be baptized, and Father Mark Roosien was baptized on Holy Saturday in 2008. He did not come to Orthodoxy from birth, but through a weaving of many different traditions, starting in Western Michigan, which he told me, you could be a Catholic in Western Michigan and still be a Calvinist. That took him through to college in Chicago, where he thought he wanted to be a drummer and ended up a philosophy major, which those of us who've been to college, that tracks. In college also, he thought, do we have to go to church to be Christian? And then found himself drawn to a Palm Sunday service at an Orthodox church and was taken by the preaching where he found the philosophy that he was studying and the liturgy that was drawing him in coming together. And then he was baptized. While singing at Vespers at an Orthodox church in Chicago for the Feast of St. Demetrius, a saint for healing, Father Mark was singing a hymn that mentioned we pray for those from the earthquake, and thought, what earthquake? Where did that happen? When did it happen? Why am I singing about it now? So that rabbit hole he went down and learned that that earthquake happened 1,000 years ago, and that he was still singing about that because it was forming the liturgy and the worship back then, and still informing the worship and the liturgy in that moment he was in. He learned that earthquakes have meaning because of what else is happening at the time. And since we are both from the Northeast, we got to talk about how that earthquake that was in New Jersey, not New York. I'm from New Jersey. Was the way we experienced it had a lot to do with the influence of the coming eclipse and what was happening in the world at the time. He likes to talk about how disaster and liturgy come together. And as we talked yesterday, I learned a lot about him, and I could probably stand up here for 10 minutes telling you all about what a really neat person Father Mark is. He is married to Claire, who studies Russian history of Central Asia and has 3 awesome kids. We talked about that the biggest challenge of being Orthodox and being now in the season of Lent is that prostrating in a cassock is really hard and a little bit dangerous. Today, he wants you to know that he's interested in a modern Orthodox Christian history, especially with Russian refugees from the Bolshevik that were settled in France. And that right now, for as much as he is teaching at Yale and loving that work, he also loves being a parish pastor. And he is being drawn into that work as well. And I think most of us can learn and know what it's like to be drawn into academia and the parish and the practical at the same time. It is my delight and honor to welcome and introduce to you Dr. Mark Roosien.
Good morning. Thank you, Anne-Marie, for that beautiful, generous introduction. And as Anne-Marie mentioned, I am still in Lent. Calendars, what can you do? But because this is an ecumenical gathering, let me just wish you, Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. I was mentioning to somebody, in the Orthodox Christian tradition, during Great Lent, we actually say Alleluia more often. So this when we were singing all these rounds of Alleluia, someone asked me, "Are you okay with this?" You know, I'm thinking this is the waters I swim in, so this is very good. I also want to thank Jim Wetstein for the generous invitation to give this plenary lecture, and special thanks also to all the staff and all the speakers who have made this such a wonderful week of thinking and praying together here at Valparaiso. It's really my honor to be here. Let me start by telling you a little parable that perhaps you can relate to, based on a true story, which unfortunately comes from my own life. I'm getting onto the commuter train in my home of New Haven, Connecticut, to go down to Manhattan to see my brother and sister, who moved there during the pandemic when the rents were low, and because so many people had fled upstate. It's rush hour, and I'm running late for the train, and I get on just about 30 seconds before the doors close. And to my dismay, none of the benches that run 2 by 2 down the sides of the aisle are free. I'm going to have to share a seat. That would be fine, except that everybody has parked their bag on the seat next to them. And so as I walk down the aisle, I try to make eye contact with someone, anyone. who would be willing to move their bag and share the seat with me for the 100-minute ride downtown. Now, contrary to the reputation of the East Coast, it's not that people are unfriendly and refuse to give their bag seat, and this was news to me as someone from Michigan, where I considered everybody from the East Coast just to be flat out rude. It's actually not true. That's not the issue. They're all just glued to their phones. Every single person. And on this particular day, I'm not wearing this, which is weird enough that people usually take notice, and I can capture their eyes for just long enough to nod at them with a face that says, "Can I sit here?" You know. And then in that case, they oblige and they rustle uncomfortably, knowing they're going to have to sit next to a priest for the next hour and a half, maybe wondering if they should adjust their behavior in some way, or say something like, "Oh, hi, Father," you know. But not today. So I have to speak up and ask someone to please put their bag up so I can sit. And it takes a little bit of effort because they're just so deeply engrossed in whatever's happening on their phone. I sit down. Okay, confession time. I'm a little nosy. I can't help myself. I steal a glance at what the person next to me is looking at on their phone. I look up at what the person in front of me is doing. I look kitty corner across the aisle at what people are doing on their phones. Everyone is scrolling fast through video after video. They don't even notice me eavesdropping, and so I don't feel so bad about this. But I probably should, because a little part of me is thinking, look at these sheep. Everyone on their phone, what is life coming to? I, of course, am above all that. I pull out a book, a real paper book with a hard cover. Maybe I even pulled out a prayer book that day. I don't remember. Reader, I probably did not. I am an island of calm and sanity, nestled in my hardcover book, which I'm sure was a very serious theological book too, surrounded by the raging waters of postmodernity, where nothing is so stable as the printed word. All around me, folks scroll quickly through videos of basketball highlights, which give way to cooking tips, which give way to dance crazes, which give way to fail videos. The smartphone, truly a symbol of our times, I think, feeling very satisfied with myself. But then I get a text from my wife, Claire. I had forgotten to put the afternoon snack in my 6-year-old's backpack this morning before I dropped him off at school. It's still sitting there on the counter. He's going to be hungry and cranky when she has to pick him up this afternoon. So all of a sudden, a wave of guilt just washes over me. I'm no longer an island of peaceful calm, self-satisfied calm. I text back apologizing using 3 exclamation points. And then I just feel bad. I don't want to read theology anymore. I'm still holding my phone, and my eye is drawn to the bright pink and yellow icon of my favorite social media app, a guilty pleasure. And I pause for a second, weighing this, and then I press it with my thumb. I'll just see what's going on for the next couple of minutes. Then I'll go back to my book. And I start to scroll through the videos of basketball highlights, cooking tips, dance crazes, fail videos. I don't linger on any one of these videos for the full duration. I just keep scrolling. Unconsciously, my eyelids start to droop halfway down my eyeballs, and I probably open my mouth a little bit. And then suddenly the train stops. I look up, I'm arriving at Grand Central Station. The ride is over. Whoa, that was fast, I think. I look to my left where my seat partner is looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to get up and get out of the train. So I quickly grab my stuff, exit the train, and then walk as quickly as I can down the platform to get the metro to the Upper West Side. Now, what does this little railroad parable tell us, other than the things that it tells me about myself? Certainly, it's a parable about technology, but more specifically, it's a parable about how technology increasingly governs the way we experience time and the way we experience other people around us, or as often as not, don't experience people around us. These are the things I want to talk about in depth in my lecture this morning. A recent study showed that as of January of this year, 5 billion people, 60% of the global population, engages in social media on a daily basis, on an average of 2.5 hours per day. And this number had really ramped up during COVID, as the disaster pretty much turned everybody to the screen to live their daily lives. And that number is growing too, to the tune of 8 new users every second across platforms. These now ubiquitous platforms have changed the way we get information, the way we relate to other people and present ourselves to the world, the way we consume products. But these changes belie a more serious shift, a shift in our fundamental experience of time, our temporality itself. Tell me if you remember during COVID, especially in the early days, when you couldn't remember what day it was, right? The days blended together in an almost undifferentiated present. When you're spending all day at home, locked into screens for school, work, entertainment, even socialization, every day became Blur's Day. Now, we think of this as a time specific to catastrophes, like the pandemic, when days blend together, because this is a commonly observed phenomenon in these periods of prolonged trauma. You can't cope. Past recedes, future disappears. Every day is just coping in the present moment. But really, I think COVID merely accelerated a process of blending time together in an undifferentiated now that was already set in motion. I'm calling this market time, a time marked by 24/7 capture of attention, with maximum opportunity to extract profit especially. And the market time of today is symbolized especially by scrolling, that passive, frictionless activity that is designed through some algorithmic alchemy to keep our attention centered on a screen as time flits by. Anybody know what I'm talking? Anybody scroll here? Please, thank you. So in the first part of this paper, I'm going to explore market time as it exists today and discuss some of its pitfalls, namely the ways that it promotes fragmentation and feeds on what I think is particularly sinister form of distraction. Distraction from the world, distraction from God, distraction from ourselves, and especially distraction from others. In the second part, I will pivot to discuss a radically different form of temporality, liturgical time. And I'm going to argue that the traditional liturgical time of the church, its feasts, fasts, seasons, and times of prayer, structures of days, weeks, months, and years, can be a means of avoiding the pitfalls inherent to market time. And to highlight this, I'm going to focus on a rather maximalist approach to liturgical time in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which is my own home tradition, both in theory and in practice. And so as a case study that illuminates some of the potential for embracing liturgical time in an age of market time, I'm going to discuss a very special intentional community of Russian Orthodox refugees in Paris that was organized in the 1930s on the eve of World War II, a group called Orthodox Action. The liturgical and social life of this community shows us a different way to inhabit time through the liturgy, a way that resists fragmentation and allows us to focus attention on God, the world, and especially on others. All right. The rise of market time. Let's zoom out for a second. Over the past 1,000 years, the Western world has experienced massive changes in how it understands and experiences time. If you were a peasant living in, let's say, France in the 11th century, your days would be structured more or less by the loose rhythms of sunrise and sunset, summer and winter, rain and drought. These rhythms were measured by sundials and water clocks, and of course, the pealing of church bells that signaled times for services and canonical hours of prayer. There were also plenty of days off for feasts and festivals, or just plain nothing to do, like in the winter. But this temporal regime was not to last. Back in the 1960s, the French historian Jacques Le Goff made the influential argument that merchant's time, a time as measured by fixed calculations of minutes and hours on the new mechanical clocks and watches that were invented, gradually displaced Europe's looser shared rhythms of time beginning in the High Middle Ages and into the modern period. Not only was merchant's time a more standardized mode of timekeeping, but it also, as the name suggests, inaugurated an extractive attitude towards time. Time was now money. And this attitude was, at first at least, very strongly attacked by the church as being avaricious. But they too gave way. The standardization of time continued apace into the early modern period as time began to be seen increasingly in very mathematical Euclidean terms. An emblem of this modern way of thinking about time was the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. We all love Kant, right? Locals in Kant's town of Königsberg called him the Königsberg clock because of his invariable daily ritual of taking a 1-hour walk every day exactly at 3 p.m. The strictness and precision of his daily habits was also reflected in the strictness and precision of his philosophy. Kant's theory of knowledge is kind of like a grand secular cathedral, a perfectly calibrated building with 0 flaws, with shimmers and gleams with frosty coldness. He understood time as a mathematically consistent and eternally stable grid in our minds, into which data points of experience can be placed and then subjected to analysis. Time is not a thing out there that we can empirically describe. Rather, time is the transcendental background in which we experience anything at all. That was Kant's breakthrough. Now, Kant's notion of time as a transcendental background to experience, I think, is basically right. But what he got wrong was his idea of the mathematical consistency of time, an idea that was built on Newtonian and Euclidean pictures of reality that were totally dismantled in the 20th century. Einstein's theory of relativity showed that time, space, and motion were relative in physical terms, not fixed, like a grid. And this discovery in the realm of physics was complemented by philosophers who developed the method of phenomenology. Thinkers like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger agreed with Kant that time was indeed the background and context for our experience of anything, part of our life world. But they showed that the temporal dimension of time is changing constantly. Time is not a transcendental grid, but rather a churning sea into which we are thrown without a lifeboat, clinging to a present that is constantly going up and down on waves between past and future, attention and boredom, and which drives irrevocably toward its finality, death. That's existentialism for you. Death is my own most possibility. In other words, the 20th century revealed that time, as we really experience it, is anything but fixed. But that wasn't the real revelation, in a sense. The real revelation is that if time is not fixed, then time can be manipulated. I don't mean time travel, which is interestingly a theory, a sort of science fiction idea that arose at the same time as Einstein and Husserl and all that, and spawned the genre of science fiction. Not talking about time travel. I mean the manipulation of time for profit. Moments are not just moments. They are opportunities. opportunities to capture attention, out of which to extract profit with greater and greater efficiency. One of the 20th century's greatest achievements in attention capture was, of course, the television. As the critic Raymond Williams argued back in the 70s, television creates a sense of time as flow. Regularly programmed shows on TV could be woven seamlessly between advertisements that alerted audiences to new and fun possibilities for commodity consumption. Flow is characterized by a sense of control. You can always turn off the TV. A loss of anxiety, elimination of boredom. All you need to do is watch my kids on Saturday morning screen time to know that this is still true, or the Super Bowl, one of the last regularly scheduled programs that people still make time to tune into, and then are subjected to the ads, which we all love. Let's be honest. Some of us don't even watch the game. We just watch the commercials. The 21st century, however, has witnessed another massive shift in our sense of time, a shift that I think we're still trying to comprehend, especially as the church. The media theorist Jonathan Crary calls this the 24/7 time of late capitalism, a temporal regime in which market forces seek to extract maximum profit and value from each moment, whether you're on the clock or off the clock. The age of the clock is over. Mrs. Murphy is dead. The clock is also dead. The age of regularly scheduled television programs is over. Today's 24/7 time, Crary writes, quote, can be characterized as a generalized inscription of human life into duration without breaks, defined by a principle of continuous functioning. It is a time that no longer passes beyond clock time. Just think about how work and leisure, on the clock and off the clock, were so, that line was totally blurred and almost erased during the pandemic. And that's just the new reality that we live in. Maybe this was always the reality for pastors, which I'm realizing. I should tell you, I'm a new pastor. I was ordained about a year ago. And I'm getting used to this thing where I have to always actually check my cell phone in case someone's dying in the hospital. And I have a very aging congregation, so that's a real possibility. In fact, it's happening this week as we speak. So I have to be on my phone at all times. I have to leave it on. Now, the primary symbol and vehicle of 24/7 time is, of course, social media. And I'm specifically interested in TikTok's innovation of the video scroll, which has also been embraced by its imitators on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Here's a little GIF I found. This is actually kind of old, because this is still like a timeline. The TikTok scroll is just video after video. It's totally seamless. There's no breaks between them. These video feeds on the platforms are generated by sophisticated algorithms designed to capture your attention based on information you put into it. Likes, comments, even just the prolonged gaze at the screen on a particular kind of content. It's tracking that through the phone, the camera. So almost overnight, scrolling has become an international pastime, or maybe an international compulsion. We turn to scrolling to fill empty time, the time between things, even just a few minutes waiting at the grocery store to check out. It's compulsive. I mean, this is confessional, basically. I'm sitting at the grocery store. I have to wait a few minutes. I'm like, well, what's going on? I don't even think about it. Scrolling affects our experience of time in a new, and I would say really unprecedented way. This is not time as flow, but time as drift. Tennessee Williams, the great playwright, described drift in his novel, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone. He writes, "The drift, going into a room and drifting out of a room because there was no real purpose in going in the first place, nor any purpose in going back out again. That was the drift. The drift was everything that you did without having a reason." It's aimless. It has no purposeful object or direction. And it has a lightness, an absence of friction. And yet, paradoxically, scrolling is not even all that fun. You heard the doom scroll? That was a big thing in the pandemic, doom scrolling, where you're just like, oh my God, this world is falling apart, and yet I can't stop. Scrollers experience a reduction of the temporal field into pure presence with no past and no future. The philosopher Jakub Marek writes in just the article from this year, in scrolling, we embrace and experience the rudimentary temporality of living in the moment, of living in a timeless present, where nothing happens, despite everything constantly changing. End quote. Each individual feed item, video, photo, gives way to the very movement of the scroll. That's the main thing here, the need to be constantly moving forward with nothing to slow it down. Scrolling, in a sense, makes change permanent, as the contents of the feed have a fleeting presence. Every individual item lacks independence and context, and what remains is just pure scrolling, the drifting movement forward, a standstill dressed up as change. The scroller, myself on the train, is passive, eyes drooping, mouth open, having relinquished control and just let the scroll do its thing. Meanwhile, the world beyond the screen quickly fades away. Past and future collapse into the present. Time speeds up and slows down as dictated by the pace of scrolling itself. Now, why do I call this market time instead of something like postmodern time or internet time? Digital experiences are designed to be repetitious, interchangeable, and just like money, fungible, monetizable. Markets benefit from the sameness and repetition inherent in our digital life worlds. Smart technologies and AI have created these rhythms, speeds, and formats so that our actions can be easily monetized, even actions as subtle as resting one's gaze momentarily upon an image on the screen of the smartphone. And if you read the studies, the new temporality of social media, especially during the pandemic, was an incredible boon for the bottom line of the major corporate conglomerates that own and benefit from social media. Even if we're not aware of it, advertising is one of the most common things we see in our feeds. Users who contribute to these platforms become more than individual personalities on display. Here's what I ate for breakfast. Here's a silly thing my cat did. That's over. They become content creators, able to monetize and market their brand, while actual corporate brands market commodities through these willing and often very inexpensive users. Indeed, users often describe themselves as having or even being a brand and must constantly be filmed to keep the income coming in. Those who consume this content help others build their brands by participating in their brand construction. They, in turn, also become part of the brand themselves. And so in this way, ads and content blend together seamlessly, tuned to the algorithms implanted to create vibes. Vibes that capture attention in this state of passivity and relinquishment of control. And vibes, as it turns out, are incredibly powerful generators of clicks and finger taps and buy buttons. It's no accident that the market time of 24/7 and the rise of video scrolling were accelerated during the pandemic. While those months and years seemed like a radical break from the normal structures of time in our everyday lives, in which past and present and future collapsed into the trauma of the moment, a moment we often wish to escape through scrolling, this experience of time is precisely the preferred mode of 24/7 temporality of late capitalist time. As lockdowns forced many to dwell in continuously digital spaces, it allowed the pace of consumption to proceed uninhibited by shared periods of rest or vacation, any sharp separation between work and leisure. Meanwhile, wealth transferred irrevocably upward. Okay, I admit that I find very little that is redeemable about 24/7 time, as is clear. Even though I confessed to you at the beginning, I myself am a willing and active participant in it. So I'll look forward to potential objections in the Q&A to this. But for now, I just want to make a blatantly one-sided negative case. And I see two main problems with 24/7 time as symbolized and embodied in scrolling. First, it promotes fragmentation. Crary argues that our digital life worlds are bad for communal identity and action, since, quote, overlaid onto them all are the practices of individual time management made possible by 24/7 networks and markets. While social media provide a platform for creativity and expression, their temporal frame remains firmly rooted in timekeeping habits designed to be individualized and thereby economically exploited. Indeed, because of the market's demand for homogeneity and fungibility, Crary contends, 24/7 temporality is incompatible with, quote, any social behaviors that have a rhythmic pattern of action and pause. This would include any social exchange involving sharing, reciprocity, or cooperation. Part of the problem with a loss of shared temporality, shared time, where we're all on our individual feeds, is that we lose a shared story. Each of us is on their own individualized journey, a journey of vibes, drifting through the immediacy of the present without a sense of where we came from, without a particular end, either for ourselves, our communities, or for the world in general. The big existential questions of cosmic origin or eschatological destiny are definitively set aside. And so aside from the problem of simply not noticing anyone when you're scrolling on the train, it's not conducive to the creation of strong communities and the shared narratives that sustain them. The other main problem I see with market time is the problem of distraction. We human beings love to be distracted because it's just so much easier than constant attention to things, especially the things that really matter. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal, this is my favorite quote of his, said this: "The sole cause of a person's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his room." The promise of instant gratification and immediate fulfillment baked into today's market time creates an almost obsessive need for something to be happening all the time. If you have 2 minutes between tasks, time to scroll. Any downtime must be filled, and now so often it is filled by scrolling. Pascal recognized distraction to be part of the human condition. So is scrolling really so different from any other way to distract ourselves? I would argue that it is. Scrolling embodies impatience, what Kierkegaard described as a flight from the major existential questions of life. The delicious ease of scrolling, its total lack of friction, makes it uniquely able to fill all those little gaps in our lives. Scrolling lulls us into a state of complacent, trance-like attention to content that really cannot provoke or challenge us. If you come across some content that might prick your conscience, you scroll by real fast. If we encounter something like a disturbing image, we scroll by real fast because we want to immediately forget and remain in that dull yet eternal present. And the sinister side of all this is that human beings need to experience shocks and confrontations to snap out of the slumber of distraction that disperses our attention. Scrolling the feed in search of vibes does not allow us to attend to God, to ourselves, and to others in meaningful ways. Okay, so thus far I've argued that we live in a 24/7 market time, symbolized and embodied by the phenomenon of scrolling, especially video feeds. This passive activity flattens time into a constantly changing present with no clear direction for the future or awareness of the past, and thereby maps neatly onto the temporality of disaster. 24/7 time poses many problems, of which I have highlighted two: fragmentation and distraction. It promotes the kind of distraction that precludes us from attending meaningfully to the world around us, to ourselves, to God, to our neighbor. And these, I would argue, are major social, psychological, and spiritual problems. Now, in the second half of this paper, I want to outline a sharply contrasting sense of time, liturgical time. I'm going to suggest that Christian liturgical traditions possess a temporality that can resist fragmentation through the construction of shared stories, stories that are reinforced in liturgical practice. Rather than collapsing past and future into the present, liturgical time expands and enlarges the present by stretching backwards into the salvific past of Christ's cross and forwards into an eschatological future that is both already here and not yet. And I will further argue that liturgical time can encourage the kind of attention to God, the world, and to others that is demanded by the gospel. And I will do so by looking through the lens of a liturgically maximalist tradition, my own Eastern Orthodox tradition, and use as a case study the intentional Christian community Orthodox Action, which I turn to now. The Christian tradition engages time in deep and complex ways in its organization of days, weeks, seasons, years, feasts, and fasts. And for various reasons, especially the medieval monasticization of the Byzantine Rite, which is the kind of technical term for the liturgy that's shared by the Eastern Orthodox churches, the Orthodox tradition has preserved a robust and maximalist practice of liturgical timekeeping, and thus presents us with a sharp contrast that we can use to map over market time. And I really, people talk a lot about this kind of thing very theoretically. And I really today want to drill down to just a concrete example. Because let's be honest, we ask liturgy to do a lot of things for us that sometimes it just can't do, or we ascribe to it practices of formation that it may not actually do. And sometimes rituals can deform us. There's literature about this now too. So I want to look at one community that I think did it well. This group, Orthodox Action, this is a group that is the subject of a research project I'm currently working on. It was organized in the 1930s with the intention of serving the poor, the sick, and the infirm among Russian refugees in France who fled the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution. Now, the genius of this community was that they tried to integrate social action, intellectual formation, and liturgical worship into one consistent praxis. It was like three legs of a stool. That was their genius. The group was founded by a charismatic nun and activist named Mother Maria Skoptsova, who was canonized as a saint in our church 20 years ago, because of this work, but also because she died in a Nazi concentration camp, offering herself to the gas chamber in exchange for a Jewish prisoner. Now, unlike most Orthodox monastics who live in monasteries that are understandably inward-looking and relatively secluded from the outside world, Mother Maria's calling was outward-looking and world-facing. She viewed her monastic calling within the context of a world on fire between the world wars. She wrote, "At present, monastics possess only one monastery, the whole wide world." She and her partners founded Orthodox Action as a kind of society within a society, seeking to do the world, as Aidan Kavanaugh once described liturgy, as the world was meant to be done. In 1934, Orthodox Action purchased a large abandoned house at 77 Rue de l'Ormel in Paris's 15th arrondissement, a poor district where many Russian refugees lived. This building could house dozens of people and had rooms large enough to feed 100 at a time. And this group served thousands and thousands of meals over the course of their 8-year existence. They were shut down in 1942 by the Gestapo. They were making baptismal cards for Jews to shield them from the secret police. Mother Maria herself was pretty famous around Paris because she would used to run through the streets in her monastic garb, smoking cigarettes, and finding desperate and drunk people in the highways and byways, and sometimes literally dragging them to the center for food and shelter. It was also a hub of intellectual life. There was a steady schedule of lectures by some of the leading thinkers of the time, the philosopher Nikolai Berdyaev, the theologian Sergius Bulgakov, people like Jacques Maritain would come there, Emmanuel Mounier. So not just Orthodox, but they had relations with Catholic and Protestant thinkers as well. Father Lev Gillet, who wrote under the pen name A Monk of the Eastern Church, lived there as the community's chaplain in its early days. And he gave a colorful account of this peculiar monastery, he says. It is a strange pandemonium. We have young girls, madmen, exiles, unemployed workers, and at the moment, the choir of the Russian opera, the Gregorian choir of Dom Malherbe, a missionary center, and services in the chapel every morning and evening. Orthodox Action set up weekly schools in various neighborhoods around Paris, established rest homes for the destitute in need of food and shelter, other than just that one center. They founded a sanatorium for patients suffering from tuberculosis. They rescued Russian refugees who had been institutionalized in mental facilities, mostly because the French couldn't understand their language and what they needed. The social action in which Orthodox Action engaged is impressive, especially given their meager resources. But I want to focus on their liturgical life, how it fit together with these broader efforts. Orthodox Action considered everything they did as flowing from the liturgy, a liturgy both inside and outside the church. They worshiped in this brick garage on the backyard of the property, which they converted into a chapel in homespun fashion. Mother Maria herself was an artist and a poet and a theologian, and painted many of the icons, made liturgical embroideries, banners, beautiful sets of handmade vestments. I'll just show you some of the things that she made. On the left there is an embroidered icon of the Mother of God, and there's another one on the wall next to some of her painted icons. She stitched this scene of the Last Supper to go over the doors of the icon screen. This is a beautiful set of vestments that she made. She even organized the course to train chanters for church services, which is no easy task, by the way, to just find people to sing. I guess you all know that. I'm new to this. I'm like, well, I was a choir director for many years in a parish, and so I was always there. But now as a priest, I'm like, where are you people? I need singers. Everything's a cappella in our tradition, so you really need them. She was able to train 10 well-trained singers in the first year. The Orthodox Action Chapel was committed to the full cycle of daily, weekly, annual services on the church's liturgical calendar. Here I want to note an important aspect of liturgical time in general. Whereas market time militates against shared stories in favor of fragmented individual stories, liturgical time invites worshipers into a shared yet variegated story that is not of their own making. In liturgical time, writes the philosopher Christina Geschwantner, who has written beautifully on the phenomenology of liturgy. She writes, "We are no longer the ones who open up the world, but we become dispossessed, swallowed up in the larger story." Liturgical time is meaningful precisely because we didn't invent it. It didn't begin with us and our vibes. This temporal structure can allow for communities to resist fragmentation and cultivate solidarity by seeing themselves and others as participants in an ongoing story of Christ's salvation and liberation of the whole world, looking forward to the renewed heavens and the renewed earth. The time of year that is shared most fully and viscerally by all is Holy Week, the week preceding Pascha or Easter. Every year, this week is packed with daily services commemorating the days before Jesus' death and resurrection. Such a schedule, Geschwantner notes, wreaks havoc on one's normal schedule. One enters into a different kind of temporality where regular time seems suspended. In many parishes, even today, parishioners take time off work to attend long services, standing if your church doesn't have pews, which mine unfortunately does. But that'll change, I'm just kidding. My parishioners would crucify me. This time spent deep within the story of redemption is felt to matter more than other times because of worshipers' anticipation of the Paschal feast. The feast involves not just that day, but spiritual, material preparation, prayer, fasting, cooking, cleaning. All of this colored by memories of past feasting and fasting. This all-encompassing sense of time shaped the life of the chapel at Orthodox Action as well. Even as World War II was ravaging Europe, they continued to make time for the services of Holy Week and Pascha, not fleeing into some dull present. One Orthodox Action member left a record that I found in the archives of the Easter Vigil at Orthodox Action in 1940, just days before the Nazi invasion of Paris. So let me just read to you the description. I'll show you a photo. This is not from 1940. You can tell from the smartphones. We can talk about that later. But this is a typical scene at Pascha. Father Dimitri, who was the chaplain at the time, doesn't walk. He flies around the place. His white, jubilant vestments have seemed to grow wings. He rejoices in the Lord. His sonorous, victorious voice calls out, "Christ is risen." And the crowd makes a path for him with a wave of fire from the candles, throwing back at him the joyful clatter, "Indeed, he is risen." Once back at the holy table, he sings out the little litany and then once again rushes through the crowd, white, shining, winged with burning roses in his hands. He is to me like the angel who rolled away the stone from the tomb. Mother Maria stands near the altar, a burning candle lighting up her face from below. Her eyes are watery with tears and happy. After Matins, the festive bustle, everyone is saying, "Christ is risen," congratulating one another, and the crowd disperses. And those who remain go into the church for liturgy. Everyone receives communion, which, by the way, was rare at that time among Orthodox Christians. Father Dimitri reads solemnly, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." The Paschal Gospel. Behind the thick walls of this garage church, there was the darkness of war, the darkness of the terrible spring of 1940. But in the church, all is in white, heavenly light. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. This description of the Easter Vigil offers a striking juxtaposition between the world inside the church and outside. Outside, time was ruthlessly collapsing as catastrophe beckoned, but inside, worshipers inhabit the feast for which they have been fasting all throughout Great Lent. The exclamation said by all, "Christ is risen, indeed he is risen," is itself an affirmation of the time that is beyond the mere present, one that includes the anamnetic remembrance and the eschatological hope within its temporal horizon. Geschwantner writes, "The liturgical present is only given meaningfully if it is precisely given at the same time and within the same moment as anticipation and memory. Rather than an endless repetition of false novelty that fragments users who occupy their own individualized, branded world of vibes, liturgical feasts and fasts can allow communities to appropriate a shared story of creation and redemption in their own time and place." Geschwantner describes this perceptively. Each moment matters profoundly, not as one in a sequence of nows, but as the moment that encapsulates all of time. The heightened moment of the feast then in some way infects all of time, bleeds into the ordinary, gives it significance. The liturgical life of Orthodox Action also reinforced the kind of attention to the neighbor that they embodied profoundly in their social action. Orthodox Action's life was centered on the other, not only in practice, but also in theory. Mother Maria wrote in an essay called The Second Gospel Commandment that mass catastrophe, and here's where she's referring to the war and the revolution and everything, can create in Christians a certain immersion in oneself, a withdrawal from life, a standing of the solitary human before God. With an exclusive focus on one's own little world in times of catastrophe, Christians are tempted to remain, quote, dispersed and disunited, while the world becomes for them nothing but a sort of evil phantom, end quote. This is a great temptation both for each individual Christian and for the church itself. And I would like, she resolves, to rise against it with all my strength and call people to each other and to stand before God, to suffer sorrows together, to resist temptations together. Mother Maria opposed what we would call charity, that is so easily done for ulterior motives, whether it's individual salvation or getting people in the pews that we think will somehow come to us if we give them food or something. She writes, this is not the love that Christ taught us. She writes, "His love, given to us in inheritance, is true sacrificial love. The giving of the soul, not in order to receive it back with interest, so to speak, but not as an act in its own name, but as an act in the name of the neighbor, and only in his name. Our love for whom reveals to us the image of God in him." This outward, other-centric orientation gets to the heart of what Orthodox Action was all about. All the components of their intentional life together, social, intellectual, liturgical, were not for the sake of gaining individual salvation, not for the sake of maintaining or perpetuating their community and the institution. Their mission was precisely for the other and in the name of the other. And it is only this love for the other that reveals to us the image of God. Why? Because the other is where Christ is discovered. She writes, Christ gave us the firm and true teaching that we meet him in every poor and unhappy person. Let us take that into consideration and give this poor and unhappy person our love, because he only seems poor and unhappy to us, but in fact he is the King of heaven. Here's an icon of her, and the scroll she's holding kind of embodies her outlook. This teaching was the core motivation for Orthodox Action's social work, and I would argue is reinforced by their liturgical practice. The emphasis on attention is always noticed by first-time visitors to Orthodox liturgical services because you hear the deacon or the priest calling out, "Let us attend," or "Let us be attentive." I don't have a deacon in my parish, so I do that. It's like I do both parts. Now, one of the chief ways in which Orthodox Action's liturgical practice encourage attention to the other outside the community, was by taking responsibility for poor, forgotten people of Orthodox Christian belief, people that they themselves didn't know, who had died in hospitals without anyone to bury them. So they worked with French authorities to identify these people and then took charge of their remains and gave them proper funerals. Especially during difficult times, they could hold 2 or 3 funerals a day in the chapel and bury the folks in the backyard. Not only that, but they wove these unknown neighbors, these strangers, literally into their community's liturgical life. Upon the death of a stranger buried by Orthodox Action in their chapel, Mother Maria would stitch their names into a giant curtain that hung prominently on the wall of the chapel. Unfortunately, I can't find a picture of this. And their names would be mentioned during litanies for the departed. Here's a description from that eyewitness again. Apart from evening and morning services and offices set on the request of individual faithful Orthodox, this chapel became especially useful for funeral services of Orthodox Christians who died in the Hotel Dieu or other terminal hospitals, as it required no climbing of steps or extra hearse attendants. Like all churches, they were understaffed. Mother Maria saluted each one as he or she entered the chapel and left for eternal life. She devised a large wall curtain made of panels of heavy cloth, and she began knitting into it, one below the other, the first names of each one for whom the last rites were celebrated, and the chaplain would name each one when he came to the rubric Prayer for the Departed: John, Mary, Martha, Boris, the Lord remembering them all. Orthodox Action experienced the catastrophe of forced emigration in the Second World War not with a turn inward to individualize practices of time management or narratives of institutional survival, but with a turn outwards towards the other. Fully cognizant of the weight of the apocalyptic times in which they lived, they nevertheless sought to bring people together, both those within the immediate community and those outside, into a shared story of creation and redemption. In conclusion, I have set up 2 very different modes of time. On the one hand, market time creates and feeds on an undifferentiated present, a time in which past and future collapse into the now. The ever more ubiquitous phenomenon of scrolling is both a symbol of market time and a driver of it. And the more we engage in this behavior, the more we are enmeshed and entrapped in a new, highly individualized temporality. The frictionless ease of scrolling creates new opportunities for commodity consumption to the point where users themselves can become commodities. Users become content creators become brands, brands become identities, fully consumable and easily exploitable. This creates serious social, psychological, and spiritual problems. It leads to fragmentation. Lost in the scroll, we can no longer participate in a shared story, whether the smaller communal stories or the big story, with a capital S. God's creation and redemption of the world through the incarnation, death, and resurrection of the Word, and the sending of this Holy Spirit in our midst. Instead, we are caught passively in a world of vibes, seeking new experiences that never satisfy other than the dull, numbing newness of scrolling itself. Market time also feeds on the human need for distraction, insidiously pulling us away from the big questions of life. Market time is more than mere escapism. It is a cutting off of the world and others around us, a narrowing of horizons, and a foreclosure of possibilities for real concern and real transcendence. I believe liturgical time offers us another way. Rather than collapsing past and future into an undifferentiated present, it enlarges time to include not only the pastness and futurity of our own stories and those of our community, but the protological past of creation and the eschatological future of redemption. And as I said before, I think all of us know this is not automatic. Liturgy doesn't always do what we think it does or what it should do. And so I've used the example of Orthodox Action to show how one community appropriated this expansive sense of time, not only to live within this grand story, but also to allow it to inspire and feed their mission of sacrificial love and concern for others. Seen and embraced in this way, liturgical time can not only bring us deep into the heart of Christ and his saving work, but it can also direct us outward, even in times of catastrophe, and thus participate in the mission of the Spirit. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Mark. We'll take a 30-minute break. Workshop sessions begin at 11:15 in various locations. Consult your booklet. Feel free to change your mind.